Hundreds of 911 calls are providing a rare glimpse inside Georgia's largest ICE detention center, one of the largest ICE detention centers here in Georgia. 11 Live investigates. Savannah Levins looks at what those records reveal and why advocates say the impact extends beyond the walls of Stewart Detention Center.
We have one female that has to go out. She's pregnant and she's spilling her blood. We have 01 male that is unresponsive. He was found laying in a pool of blood.
These are some of the nearly 600 emergency calls we reviewed over the last several years from Stewart Detention Center, one of the nation's largest immigration detention facilities.
911 was your emergency.
The number of 911 calls from Stewart has steadily increased year over year, from 68 calls in 2022 to 187 last year.
We have a guy that hung himself in the cell.
The rise in calls coincides with a detainee population that's also increased, from about 1,100 in 2022 to more than 2,000 today. The calls also highlight the strain put on Stewart County's limited ambulance service.
We've only got one ambulance in Stewart County today.
And even the need to outsource help.
They're currently on a call. I'll have to see if I get mutual aid or it'll be an extended wait time.
Conversations between dispatch and first responders capturing the frustration.
It happens all the time, to the point where I don't have an ambulance for the, citizens of the county.
Whatever happens inside of the detention center, they're not getting the attention immediately that they need.
Amilcar Valencia is executive director of El Refugio, a nonprofit that provides lodging and support to people visiting loved ones detained at Stewart. He believes the calls reflect inadequate medical care inside the facility.
People say, I basically has to be dying in order to receive medical attention in this facility.
Core Civic, the private company that operates Stewart under contract with ICE, disputes that. The company says medical staff are present around the clock, adding detainees are seen by medical staff within 24 hours of receiving a sick call request and within 4 minutes for emergencies.
The medical was atrocious.
Godfrey Wade is a U.S. Army veteran who spent nearly 6 months at Stewart before being deported to Jamaica. He says his experience did not align with Core Civic's description.
It took almost 6 weeks for me to get a sick call slipped through. I had a dental pain that I eventually lose the tooth when I came to Jamaica. It was that bad.
Wade acknowledges he received an intake health screening and saw a doctor 3 times while at Stewart, but he says securing that care was slow and unpredictable.
You're really at the mercy of how quickly they respond.
Core Civic says the 911 records we obtained show staff are appropriately escalating medical emergencies, not that care is inadequate.
Female that needs to go out, she's a pregnant female. She has severe vomiting and she has abdominal pain.
Some people might say, well, if it's so bad inside these facilities, why don't you just self-deport and pursue citizenship?
I think that's what this administration is trying to do. Either go or we will force you to leave. And in the process, we will take away your whole humanity. And when they are not treated with our respect, we need to raise our voices.
All right, we are joined right now by 11 Alive investigative reporter Savannah Levins. Savannah, thank you for your reporting. Thank you for being here. That was 3.5 minutes of really in-depth reporting. I've also read our web article, which is a lot more in there. What else should people know about this project, this reporting process that you've been on for quite some time now?
Yeah, you know what? I think what's really interesting, and we were talking about this before we went up on camera, but Georgia's one of the few states that allows you to access audio recordings of 911 calls. And there's certainly the debate in itself about that, but it has offered us the unique opportunity to really have a glimpse at what is going on inside facilities like Stewart. Of course, we have requested to go inside with our cameras for them to show us what's going on. We hear these different stories from detainees. We hear very different stories from agencies like DHS and companies like Core Civic that operate these facilities. So it's hard as a journalist to, independently corroborate what the truth is, and to what extent both sides' stories, align. So I think these don't lie. The 911 calls are coming directly from the mouths of the staff who are reporting real incidents. So I think that made this story particularly unique.
And you really underscored there. This is one of the best vantage points we have seen, certainly that I have seen, into the situation and the kind of healthcare state of play inside of this ICE detention facility or any other here in Georgia. You mentioned CoreCivic, which is the company that runs this detention facility. What all did they say to you?
A lot. So you mentioned the web article, they can go there. And it's interesting, too, because you sometimes would anticipate that these companies might be particularly tight-lipped, or that DHS would be. And honestly, DHS being the Department of Homeland Security. And in the past, like even under past administrations, they had been, but they've both been very open with me with this story and quite frank in their, rebuttals. Obviously, CoreCivic has said that they have someone on staff all the time, someone on call all the time. Now, it might not necessarily be a doctor there on staff all the time, but 11 to 7, I believe they said at least someone is there, and then someone on call all the time. And they said that they respond to sick calls within 4 minutes, and sick forms, I should say. You heard Godfrey talk about like how they basically have to fill out a form and drop it in a box. Now, Godfrey says they don't get to it until the next day. He also said, you heard him say it took 6 weeks for him to get one. Well, CoreCivic says it's 4 days, I think, and then minutes, just minutes for emergencies. And now, again, we're hearing kind of different stories from some detainees we're talking about, but they say that it's, there's nothing wrong with what they have. And in fact, DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, said also that their medical that CoreCivic is providing at Stewart is better than most prisons in the United States. And they went as far as to say this is the best medical care a lot of these detainees will ever receive, let alone in any other country. So they say they're very proud of what they're offering.
And this really shines a light on something and a theme that really goes along with almost all reporting on carceral institutions, whether it's a prison or a detention center for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It's very difficult to get inside and see what is really going on. Often when we're talking about the prison system, the Georgia Department of Corrections, for instance, what we learn about the state of play inside of their facilities often comes from litigation, and sometimes with ICE detention facilities as well. And now in your reporting through these 911 calls, another thing that came out in that story that really stood out to me, and I suspect it did to you as well, is the impact on the county.
Yeah.
You heard those recordings, a 911 operator audibly frustrated, saying effectively this is tying up the very few ambulance resources they have responding to calls at Stewart Detention Center, and making it, from what he said in that recording, tough to get those ambulances to residents of the county.
I mean, anyone who's been down, Lumpkin, Stewart County, it's a small town. They don't have the capacity for that thing, that type of thing. CoreCivic said that, that is out of their control. And we know Stewart County has partnered with mutual aid to be able to call and help when they need it, because they do have 1 to 2 ambulances. That's it. And when you're seeing this, level of calls, and of course, like Stewart Detention, whether it was a normal prison or an immigration facility, like you're gonna get additional calls. You've got a population of, 2,000 plus staff. That's naturally going to happen. So, I do think it's been interesting to look at, and I think we'll follow up probably more potentially in a follow-up story about, how that is affecting EMS. But you hear the frustration in those calls. So yeah, I do think that's interesting. And Mr. Valencia also brought up the point that not only is that a burden on the taxpayers in that community, the citizens who might receive delayed care because of it, but also the detainees who may have to wait even longer for emergencies to be transported.
Has the situation there been exacerbated or grown more acute alongside the president's ramped up immigration enforcement push?
Well, we know the population, obviously has increased when you look back. I mean, I included it in the story, but, nearly doubled from today to 2022. So there is that. I think if you drop a population of 2,000 people into any community, that would, be a strain on that community's resources. And I do think that it has happened increasingly. There hasn't been a year, I would say, where it shot up, and obviously it continued to increase even when President Trump was not in office. So we were still seeing those step increases and the population going up and the number of calls going up. But certainly, I mean, as there are more people, these incidents will continue to rise.
And are the detainees there? And you may not know this, but I'm curious if you do know, where are the detainees coming from? Are they all folks who are taken into custody here in Georgia and then transported to Stewart, or do they come from all over?
Not necessarily. I mean, a lot of them, were detained from Georgia, but we have seen DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, and ICE, moving them to different facilities. Like at one point, Godfrey Wade, the man we interviewed, was moved to Louisiana, stayed a couple months at that facility. I think, they do that for a few different reasons. Some could be, housing limitations at current facilities and things like that. But no, not necessarily all Georgians.
All right, Savannah, we're a little short on time.
Yeah.
I want to kind of give you the floor here. You work on these projects for a long time. I know you and everybody else in the special projects team really gets into the details before any story is published. What's the biggest takeaway that you have after going on this reporting journey here?
I think it's interesting. Something that Core Civic pointed out was that their rate of emergency calls is lower than what you would see in the general population, right? 700 calls to every 1,000 people is the national statistic, and for them it's 93 per 1,000 people. But if you look at how many calls in the general population are emergencies, true emergencies, that number is quite small. In fact, in Atlanta, they once said it was 3% of their calls were actual emergencies, whereas what we're looking at, these are emergent situations. These are calls coming from staff, medical staff and otherwise. They're not detainees. I've seen some of the comments today, people saying, well, the detainees are just calling and holding up the lines. They don't have that access. These are medical professionals calling in for help. So I think that is important to understand. And again, just the glimpse that we're getting into some of the issues that they don't feel they can handle medically there on site, and how that impacts surrounding communities. Because of course, we're not just talking about Stewart. Where this is happening in one place, it may be happening in others.
All right, investigative reporter Savannah Levins, thank you very much. You just saw her story here. If you want to watch it later or read more, you heard us talking about the web article online right now, 11alive.com. It's a good one. It's worth reading in its entirety.